All right, we're probably good to go ahead and start. If Let's go with everyone here. Um, anyway, so good evening. I'm your president here at the NGS. We have other esteemed members of our leadership committee here also. We're your regular host and co-host. We're happy for everyone who's here and listening. Also happy to have whoever will trickle in later, of course. Let's see, if it's just going to be our leadership guys for tonight, let's say maybe we get this started with some news coming out of North Carolina. I saw that we had some topics lined up for that. Let's see. I think maybe the story we could first start off with is I see that we have something kind of in our docket about increased homelessness in North Carolina. Now, we sort of, that's not a huge surprise. I think we all expected there would be some uptick in this, just if nothing else, just due to the hurricane that came through. Obviously, homelessness this time of year out in that area is going to be a disaster. And I'm sure we're going to see kind of that sharp increase stay up for a little bit until it gets fixed. But it looks like we have some other issues with that throughout the state that you can't really blame on the weather. What do you guys know about that?
Yeah, I know here in the Triad, we've been having a pretty rough time with homelessness for at least like the last 5 years, and it continues to the numbers continue to rise. And so I know around here in the Triad, they just did a this count of the homeless folk in the area. It's called a point in time count. And this usually determines like how much federal funding North Carolina can get for homelessness. For just the Triad here, and for those of you that are not familiar with the area, the Triad is essentially Greensboro, High Point, and Winston-Salem. So we're kind of like around the foothills of North Carolina, maybe an hour to 2 hours away. But we've seen like a 20% increase just in the last year. And Winston-Salem alone, from their counting, have itself has 600, over 600. Greensboro and High Point, they're bigger cities, and combined they have over 650. No, I know in Winston there's been several city council meetings where business owners have complained of how the homeless are, they're using a bathroom in front of their establishments, scaring patrons away. And, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that that's led to also an increase in crime. And Winston's been in very rough shape for those that have been familiar somewhat with the area, especially with the decline of RJR. When RJR, with this decline in tobacco sales, this city has suffered quite a bit from that. And they've had a lot of essentially forced early retirements and layoffs. And there's just really not been a ton of job opportunities in the area. Now, obviously, there's other things that are going on in the area, but one of the things I read on that too was that a lot of the funding that they have. So there was an initiative that across the state, city officials received like $12 million to start like housing projects, different things like that. And no one knows where the money went. The money is just like any other state, like in California, that money just disappears and no one knows where it went.
Well, Winston-Salem is such a good example. So I grew up right around Winston. I went to school and church in Winston. My address is right outside in Yadkin, but still right all in that area. Yeah, Winston is an interesting, almost microcosm of the country in many ways. Maybe especially a microcosm of like kind of urban development during those years. So like, yeah, my grandfather worked for RJR, and thankfully he was able, like he had worked there Like, I think he said he literally came within only a few months of qualifying for this, but he was able to actually get a full retirement as they were restructuring. So he was able to get out of Reynolds kind of at the last minute. This was in like the early to mid 90s when they were transitioning out. But yeah, I mean, you know, similar kind of what NAFTA did to the rest of the state and the rest of the country. I mean, like, you know, the big industry left. Reynolds was a huge employer in the city. And they also, you know, employed a lot of people who didn't go to college.
Yeah.
So like a lot of people who lost their job couldn't get a comparable position somewhere else without moving. And a lot of them couldn't move, and so they were just kind of stuck. And so
Yeah, there's also the issue of, you know, not only that, but Reynolds did a fantastic job. You know, we have some of our guys in our circles that talk about elites that gave back to their community.
Yes, the Reynolds family.
And
yeah.
Yeah, they were, and you NASCAR fans know what I'm talking about too. I still call it the Winston Cup. But yeah, they did a lot for the community, and as leadership changed, and obviously, like you were saying, like with more and more regulations and NAFTA and different things like that, they got tight with it, and now, you know, it's I don't recall the name of the company, but it's a British company that owns them now.
Yeah, it's called it has a pretty boring name. It's called British American Tobacco, and they're like, yeah, I mean, like, they're just one of those like super, you know, international conglomerates. They're worth billions of dollars. They compete with another like similarly bland named company called Japanese Tobacco. You know, it's just it's these big like almost quasi nationalized groups. I remember my grandfather telling me like to get into the tobacco industry is super capital intensive because in order to make margin, you have to have really advanced tech. It's sort of like farming almost in that sense, which is kind of poetically significant because tobacco farming is also a big part of the state economy, or at least it used to be. I mean, it's still practice. It's just not as big of a share as it once was. But yeah, so the thing was you had like these, like even in the 80s and 90s, you had like these 5 tobacco companies and like they were always getting hit with antitrust lawsuits. So like every like decade or so, like they would swap major brands. So like all of a sudden you would have like, oh, like Reynolds owns Newport. Oh, that's weird. I thought Marlboro owned it. No, Marlboro owns like Lucky Strike now. And they would just like swap back and forth while holding on to their like main brands. I don't know. It's very interesting. And so now that they're gone, point being, it's kind of hard to bring it back. Like, actually, there was a group, like a smaller tobacco company that spun off of Reynolds called RAI, I believe, like Reynolds International. And they're actually headquartered in Winston again, I think. But it's not the same.
Yeah,
like,
they
was
are
never able to replace what Reynolds was bringing to the community.
Correct. Yeah, I see their stuff quite a bit, and I think they're actually operating out of some of the older Reynolds buildings. Yeah.
Well, and then, you know, if you're in Winston, and this kind of tracks the rest of the country too. Winston had this, you know, so Winston went through a really bad crime phase after that. Like, I remember it was so bad. I remember I had a friend of mine in school tell me that, like, they relocated their company's headquarters into Winston-Salem office space. And there were people who turned in their resignation the day they made that announcement. Because there was just so much crime. It's like, I just refuse to work there. Like, I'll just switch companies before I drive into downtown. Like, it was probably that bad for like 10 or 15 years. And then Winston ended up having this kind of cool, like, hipster revival, which was fueled by the fact that Wake Forest Health is big in that area. And so a lot of, like, kind of government student spending came in. But yeah, sort of like what you're saying there. Like, and this is true with a lot of these, like, places that experience these hipster revivals. Like, you know, like, you kind of got this cool scene emerge out of that. But then, like, because they're all liberals, you end up tolerating stuff like mass homelessness and low-level crime. And so that's what's happened to Winston now, too. It's come full circle.
Yeah, it's in many ways it feels like it's, you know, Asheville light.
Yeah, it does in many ways.
Yeah, and I grew up right outside of Winston, and you know, I still live maybe 20 minutes away, and I'm like in between Winston and Greensboro, and now it's funny to say this, but I'll go to Greensboro any day before Winston now.
And you would not
I
have
just
said
almost
that years
refuse.
ago.
No,
Never said that.
not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's just, I mean, we didn't mean to go on a tangent on that, but it is sort of like a picture, you know,
Correct.
like the same pattern that you're seeing in California. I mean, it's not just in California. Pretty much, I mean, California's known for it just because it has so many people in that same kind of mindset. But but like you go to these places all across the country, like you're not going to escape this kind of stuff. You know, it's like there's people who tell you to just move to a small town, like that's going to solve all your problems, and then you go to a small town and there's more crime there than there is in the city. Like, there's lots of towns like that in North Carolina, too.
Or you do what we did and the city just continues to expand and you can't escape it.
Yes, that too. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm experiencing that now.
Yeah, it's like, it's like I moved outside the city, but all of a sudden the city decided to like double its city limits. Oh well, I guess I live in Winston again.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so I mean, not to be a downer, but it is just kind of a good reminder that like going to the South or going to the Midwest, contrary to what people tell you, like isn't going to solve your problems. Or maybe you go to a small town and the government ships in 50,000 Haitians. You know, so like, you know, there's really no escaping the dysfunction in the sense like you shouldn't just try to retreat. You just got to accept that you're going to have to work with whatever you've got, kind of no matter where you live. Make the best of it. But anyway, no, that is a. Yeah, I've been noticing the homeless more. I was away from Winston by the time that they started picking up again, but I lived in Greensboro for a little bit around COVID, and man, there's homeless people everywhere.
Yeah, I grew up in Walkertown, and my parents still live there, and I've seen you can say some of it is some of the folks that live in that area are getting a little bit older, so they're not able to take care of their homes, and you can also talk about inflation, you know, kind of hurting the ability of people to keep their homes up. But I spent a good portion of my life there, and I never saw panhandlers. And during COVID, and probably up until a couple years ago, we started seeing panhandlers every time we went out to Walkertown to visit my parents, and never saw that. So it's, and I think though the people in North Carolina, in Walkertown, kind of eventually stopped that, or either got those people help, because I don't see them anymore. But that was, yeah, definitely something that I've noticed, just even in that area.
Yeah, it's I imagine that'll continue to be a problem too. I mean, essentially until you bring back kind of the will to prosecute homelessness as vagrancy. Like, it doesn't even mean you have to be super harsh with them, but like you have to have some sort of legal mechanism to like take them into custody. Otherwise, they're just going to keep living the way they live. And in America, you can't really like. I mean, I guess you can try to do something like exile. Like judges can still do that technically, but like there's no way to enforce that because they usually live in the woods. At least around here, they do. So it's not like they're living like in the city, properly speaking. They're within like, you know, undeveloped, you know, forest essentially within city limits. So it's a little bit of a disaster sometimes.
I believe they call that urban sprawl.
Yeah, that's a nice little euphemism, isn't it?
Yeah, we have the same problem. I don't live in Charlotte, but I live in the outskirts, about 30 minutes away. Well, 20 minutes away from the Mecklenburg line, which is where Charlotte's located. And it's basically as soon as as soon as you cross that line, you'll start seeing panhandlers and homeless encampments everywhere. And you're right, they all just like live in the woods, and they don't, it's the same ones that I've seen. You'll see them there for about like 2 to 3 years, but it's not uncommon to be on the other side of the county, and you see the same panhandlers 30 to 40 minutes away, because they can just hop on a bus and ride the bus and jump off there and set up camp there for another couple of weeks or months. But normally they have like little territories that they kind of congregate in. And every once in a while, the city will, go out there and start cleaning up and pretend that they care for a little while. And it usually always goes back to the same. And it's not like there's like this lack of like shelters or, places for the homeless to live. It's just that it's become super convenient for them to be where they are, and they're not really willing to take the necessary precautions. That's not the right word. To take the necessary measures to, get clean, get off drugs, and go into the shelters, because most of the shelters actually require you to do like a breathalyzer, or at least some of the ones in this area. And then if you're going to be long term, you'll have to take a drug test or something. And they mainly do that to keep violence down in those shelters as well. But what you end up having is, the people that are actually living out on the street, it's like they're like homeless extra. They're like a different version of the homeless. You'll have the ones that hang around the shelters, and they're still homeless, but they're a little bit easier to deal with. But the people that are truly out on the street, they're absolutely insane. That's at least what I see in this area.
No, I mean, that's really true. I mean, we shouldn't take this the wrong way, but in America, with all the welfare we have, if you were homeless, it's more or less by choice. Now, I'll concede that sometimes that choice is being made by people with really severe, like, clinical insanity issues, like really bad schizophrenia or something. So it's not that, we shouldn't pity them, but, like, the trope that, like, all the homeless people that you run into are, like, Aladdins just who caught a tough break just isn't true. Like, they really...
Yeah.
They either are like criminals or like they're sick. Really, I mean, that's really about the only two options you have.
Yeah, I know.
They're barbarians. They live outside, or outlaws, or whatever. Like the I guess you could say the Middle English actual definition is that they live outside of societal norms. And if you have a district attorney that's not willing to prosecute these people, or they'll get arrested for things, but I mean, they're like frequent flyers from friends that I have that are on the departments, whether it's fire, EMS, or police. They'll arrest them, they'll bring them into jail for a day or two, and then they'll get released, and they'll do the same thing. That's why when you see these things in the news, that'll pop up, some subway entertainer or something like that gets killed or dies or whatever from the hands of police. They'll try to make a big deal about it. But when you start looking at the rap sheet that they have, they've got like 50, 60, 80 something arrests, but nothing's been done. So, I mean, the laws really don't apply to them. And it's almost like the laws really don't apply to them, even short of murder, if not even like being part of murdering someone, because they'll either post bail or get out or something like that. And they're not going to show up to their court case. They're not going to show up to their trial. And I mean, like, do you expect them to, if there's like no actual repercussions or consequences for whatever you do? So I see that a lot too.
Yeah. Someone said once that, like, it's hard for us to understand, but like, if you're a homeless person in America, your relationship to the law is like pretty close to like Grand Theft Auto, in the sense that, like, like in those games, like, you're never really arrested. It's just that, like, the police will pay more and more attention to you, but if you just chill out for a little bit, they'll just go away. That's like kind of how it works if you're homeless, unless you can be directly linked to like a homicide, like as in you're the one who pulled the trigger. You'll basically just always walk if you keep your head down for a few days.
I know on a personal level, I know one person that it's clearly addiction problems. His most stable, for lack of a better term, housing has been in jail for the last year. And he's a constant repeat drunk driver, driving without license offender. And he Yeah, he's definitely like one of those guys that I've talked about. That's he needs to be in an institution because he's not well enough mentally to be able to actually make the right decisions on his own anymore. Is that jail or is that in an institution, like a mental institution for substance abuse? I'm not that person to make that call. But yeah, like what you were saying, it's the consistent and the constant repeat behaviors. And it's just there's no will to actually. It's always someone else's fault, and it's a continuous cycle for the guy that I know. And he is either homeless, living with someone, living under an underpass, or in jail. And for the most part, his most consistent home has been a jail for like the last year.
Well, and honestly,
so, yeah.
I mean, honestly, like you were saying, like jail is probably his best bet right now.
Correct, because he's no longer a threat. Even when he is not drunk, he is not of the right sound mind.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Evening, Vince. I want to jump in. I'm from Oregon, but a native to California, and we're probably a little more advanced on the whole homeless thing. Because the next level up is different counties and cities in particular literally using tax dollars to bus homeless people to other districts where it's like, well, it's not my problem. Especially bad around the metro areas, and then heaven forbid you have a place like I was from a place between San Francisco and LA, and so we would get hit with both. And we actually had a hospital that more or less specialized in like emergency services because they had to, because these counties would just play this game of hot potato with random busloads of homeless people. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do too with like these liberal presuppositions of, it's almost like a Gnostic fear of using any sort of physical force, and this like over fetishization of like self-actualization or whatever. Because really, like even from a Christian perspective, almost going about I have an illic on resistance to evil by force. The most loving thing you can do for these people is to take away their freedom, if temporarily, to help them get clear of this, to get clear of the drugs and stuff like that, because they're completely unable to make that decision for themselves. But like that kind of just goes so against like the boomer liberalism of like, well, no, like that would, that's mean and horrible and violent if you like physically restrain them, that, and then you're denying them the wonderful opportunities to like determine their own life and just figure it out or whatever.
Well, it goes.
So, yeah, I just wanted to add that in there.
Well, yeah. I mean, California, sadly, is a great example of how you think it can get bad, and then people will stop doing it, and then no, you can just keep doing it, and it just keeps getting worse almost indefinitely. Yeah, I mean, honestly, in the case you're describing, is that a money-making venture for these big cities? Like, did these smaller communities pay them to take these people in?
No, not so much. Now, I think that particular hospital probably had a very special Venn diagram where it was actually a wealthy enough county and people wanted it dealt with, but they were always on the losing end. It's more of like bureaucrats pushing spreadsheets of like, ooh, homelessness is a problem. How can I reduce homelessness? Well, we can just move it, so it's not in my jurisdiction. So it's more of that angle, as far as I know.
That's, yeah. Yeah, well, sort of like what you were saying about how it's loving to restrain people. It's also even loving to punish them in a sense. Like, if you are guilty of a crime, I mean, you're not really doing them any favors, especially if you're taking like the spiritual view. Like, it's not good for someone spiritually to keep getting away with crime because they'll just keep committing crime. And then, like, regardless of even the outcome from like a legal perspective, like it will train them to be comfortable with just committing evil. And so, yeah, I mean, it really is better. Like, I'm not saying you have to be like overly harsh, but like there's a lot of homeless people who would have been so much better off if when they were like in their 20s, someone had made them go to jail for like a full year or something. You know, nothing insane, but like something to really show them like you can't act like this, man. I'm not saying it even fix all of them, but it would probably do a lot of good to a lot of them.
Yeah, and then there's like one more demographic of homeless. So yeah, you have like the truly like insane, ill drug users. Well, then you have like the willful drug users. You do have some people who are kind of down on their luck or whatever, but then there's also people who have like this pathological resistance to authority of all kinds, where they like have this need to be out on the open road and to basically resist all laws and stuff like that, and they try and get around it however they can. And it, it probably has like psychological issues, but I think there is something of an economic problem to it. Where I know I've heard about it like in Britain, and I bet this would actually be pretty fitting to you Southern gentlemen too. People who are more subsistence living, really almost out of choice. They just prefer to be in nature. They would harvest their one little crop and get like one harvest every year, make their $100 or whatever, and that gives them everything they need to buy in town, and everything else they just provide for themselves. And unfortunately, that kind of lifestyle is like softly illegal, or functionally illegal in our like highly financialized society. So there is a pseudo economic issue to it, but I mean, you don't want to go full lib, but like, oh, just build more houses and it'll go away.
No, you're right. There is a sort of person who would like, and you do, I think, see this in the South sometimes, where it's like people who like they're not technically homeless because you can still get beater houses for very cheap around here, as long as you're willing to live in houses that are basically condemned. But some people are okay with that. You know, they'll live in like these borderline condemned houses that have been paid off since like the 60s. And yeah, you get the impression they probably work like 2 days a month, just enough to like, get a few groceries or something. But thankfully around here you can still kind of live in a house and do that, especially if you're in the country. It's not super common, but it's possible. In a place like California, I just don't think that's possible. I remember reading these horror stories.
Or Oregon either.
I remember in California reading these horror stories about how there's some instances of dual income homelessness where like you'll have like, like husbands and wives who like both have like minimum wage jobs, but but they're still homeless. I mean, it's not really funny, but it's such a ridiculous situation.
Do you think this kind of lifestyle could be kind of like blamed a little bit on Jack Kerouac's The Road? If you're familiar with that book, it's kind of like open lifestyle.
I don't know. I'm not sure what the impact would be. I'm not super familiar with that book, so. Well, a lot we could say about homelessness, but I'm sure all the listeners would love to hear about some of the stuff Trump has been doing. So, let's see. Well, I guess speaking of the South, Trump did make an appearance at, or I guess not necessarily the South, but a Southern interest. Trump made his appearance at NASCAR. So, I don't think Biden ever did this. Did Obama ever visit a NASCAR event?
I don't recall Obama ever showing up to a NASCAR event, although Joe Biden did get chanted a lot at a NASCAR event.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Man, yeah, that's right. That was the origin of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the whole kind of like "Let's Go Brandon" thing, where the newscaster was like, "Oh, they're saying let's go Brandon," and it's like, "No, they're not. They're not at all." Um, and that's kind of like sparked that whole thing. I know you had like rap music about it, and people had it on their cars, and you'd go to the gas pump and you'd see like a little like NASCAR symbol, but it would say like "Let's Go Brandon" on it. So yeah, that, I mean, I don't think that's like friendly territory for most Democrat politicians to go. And I think Obama is just too much. The Obamas are just too much of a snobs to even show up to something like that. I think that's like below. Well, I think they feel like it's below their pedigree.
Yeah, it probably would have been too much fun. So, yeah, and too American, really. I mean, it's hard to I mean, I don't know. I mean, Vivek went to the race, although I'm sure that was very weird for him. I think he's trying.
He's trying to rebrand
I know.
again, and it's just going to be such an uphill battle for him since he like decided to insert foot into mouth on Christmas Day. And it's funny because like somehow Elon was able to like Elon has that like Teflon man kind of um shtick to him where like he can say just wild crazy stuff or just have like I don't know 13 bastard children and people are just kind of like willing to wink and nod and look away at that. But I think Vivek tried to play himself initially too much as a traditional conservative. And if you're going to play that route, then you're going to have to like really, really stick to your guns on that. If that's how you framed yourself. And I like some of his ideas. Some of them are actually good, but his overall personality, what he was trying to play there, I think was a total flop. And you know, he kind of deserves every bit of scrutiny that he's getting from now on.
Oh, I think so. There's also, speaking of Musk, there's been talk of auditing Fort Knox. Now, I hadn't thought much about Fort Knox. Apparently, I think it was I forget his name, senator from Utah, Mike Lee, I think, was talking about how he even has a hard time getting access to Fort Knox, which seems very weird as a senator. Do you know if there's a reason why it's as secretive as it is? You know, like why it's seemingly more difficult to get access to than other military establishments?
Not really for sure on the Fort Knox thing. I know back when I was going through basic training back in 2011, there was a few different forts that conducted basic training, and Fort Knox was one of those actually. And they also were the home of the armor school, where all your like armor brigade combat teams, or at least your major ones, were located, including your AIT, which is your advanced individual training. But in 2011, 2012, they moved all of the um, basic training, like your trade off, which is your like training battalions and stuff like that. They moved everything out of Fort Knox, including they restructured, I think in 2008 under the Obama administration, the armored school went down to Benning. So like Fort Knox became an absolute ghost town. Like there's nothing there besides like a couple of support battalions. And then of course, you know, the legends of all the gold and, you know, Santa Anna's like, I don't know, left leg or something like that. But other than that, like it's a ghost town. There's nothing there, but it still has this kind of I don't even know, you know, I'm sure there's gold there, but I'm not for sure you know, what Fort Knox is actually doing. Um, it's not a profitable base. Like when I say profitable, nothing in the military is profitable, okay? But it's not, it's like really, really not profitable for it to still be operating. Um, if there's nothing, there's like actual no AIT there, there's no training battalions there, there's no like large units that operate out of there, like how we have here at Fort Bragg. You got the 82nd Airborne, you have the Airborne Corps here. You know, like other bases like Fort Collins, Colorado, where you have like 4th Infantry Division, or Fort Hood, Texas. You have your Cav divisions down there, or 1st Armored down in Fort Bliss. But there's like nothing there at Fort Knox. So it's still very weird that like they keep pouring money and resources into operating Fort Knox. But I've known a couple of guys that had to go there for whatever strange reason or another. And they're like, yeah, it's just completely dead there, like total ghost town.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. I mean, so apparently it hasn't even been audited, really. I think since the 70s. I think maybe it was like Nixon who was the last one to do it.
Worked out great for him.
Yeah. So that's why the deep state got him, because he found the coronavirus being stored there, and they couldn't they couldn't let him reveal the secret. No, I mean, it's funny actually. The more I learn about it, like why stuff like Area 51 became, you know, so large in the public consciousness, but there's an even older super secret base that's really suspicious that nobody's really paid much attention to until now. I think the funniest theory to me is the one I heard, that the reason they don't want you to audit Fort Knox is because there's actually more gold there than they say there is. And this goes back to all the people who think we stole the gold from Iraq. Which
I did see that. I mean, like, okay, so technically we didn't steal the gold from Iraq. We took it and we held it. And I'm sure that our elite class of bankers probably used that to leverage the markets a little bit under the Bush days. But I don't think that, from what I've read, we didn't keep any of their currency and we didn't keep their gold.
well, I mean,
We
it
gave
would.
it back to them, but I mean, at the same time, I'm sure that we at least, just like how you take out like a home loan or a car loan or credit cards, they probably used it to leverage some things in the market for a little while.
It'd be funny if after all these years, all that gold that gets sold on Fox News was just the Iraq gold. They're just
That's like, it sounds like a crazy theory, but they did some heavy lifting for the Iraq war.
no, well, but I mean, people get too lost in that stuff sometimes. I don't think anyone who thinks too hard about it will think that we spent like how many trillions of dollars on that war to steal like $100 billion worth of gold bullion. But
yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it's all part of the military-industrial complex when you like look into it, like Raytheon and British Aerospace Engineering, and then you just have your normal kind of neoconservatives like Victoria Nuland that flip-flops, between neoconservative and neoliberal ideologies over her entire career, and what is it, Kagan and all those, Podesta, like those are all kind of like, they're all the war hawks, like the Dick Cheneys and Liz Cheney's and Romney. But I don't really, honestly, it's probably they don't have an audit because they've not done any maintenance to like anything. They probably don't even have a great record. It wouldn't surprise me if like everything was still on paper and it would just be too daunting of a task like that. I don't know if you saw the thing with Elon Musk where they were like looking into Social Security and the retirement for government employees, and it's like in a mine that's like 60 feet down into the earth, and you have to take like an elevator, and everything's done by hand. And they have like so many thousands of employees that work there.
mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was just like so inefficient that they hadn't updated anything. Because the military largely works still off of a lot of like paper trail stuff. I mean, when you sign out like your gear and equipment and stuff like that, they'll give you like not a statement of charges. What is it called again? Like a hand receipt that you can keep. And they say they put it on a database or whatever, but you better like bet your bottom dollar that you keep that hand receipt that they gave you uh, in person, because when it comes time to like turn your gear in, they might have extra stuff listed on that hand receipt that you did not sign for, or there's just like nothing on that hand receipt, or half the things are missing, or you turn something in and it's no longer there. So I always kept mine. But like the military is incredibly like not efficient at anything, and that's why like every single base fails audits and the DoD fails audits, because they've not like modernized any of their equipment and the technology that they are using. I remember I was training on a system called the Spider Munition Systems, and it was from Picatinny Arsenal out in New Jersey. And they were using, this was like 2014, 2015, somewhere around that time. I was at Bragg, and they were using like Windows 95 or Windows 2000 for the laptops that we had. And I was like, what even is this? Like you'd have to like open up, what is it called, DOS or whatever, and then like type in the command. And I was like, this is garbage.
Man, in
And you're like,
2015, in
yeah,
2015,
yeah, we were using computers, like tough book style computers that were, like 20 years old. So it was pretty wild that we were like still using that stuff. Which that stuff's like easily hackable, and like you're hooking it up to a basic like high frequency antenna and like a little JBox system and everything like that. So it's not like the technology that the military is also like. Some of the technology is super high tech and super high speed, but like a vast majority of the technology that the military uses is like 20 years old. And I mean, and I guess that's kind of modern when you're looking at like near peer powers that are like, yeah, we're using artillery shells that we made in like 1955, and like a SKS that was like built in the 70s or whatever, forged in the 70s. So it's like, I guess we're still ahead in that aspect, but you can look at the vast majority of what the United States military does is just like fraud and waste, and just a boondoggle of, I mean, like if you lost that computer, they would like charge you like something ridiculous like $5,000. And I was like, bro, this is like a tough book from 1995. Like this thing is like worth like $20.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one reason why, I saw a headline today, or I mean, it was online. I'd want to source it out to make sure, but I saw something today about how the Pentagon is bracing for, or Trump has told them, or Hegseth maybe has told them to be prepared for an 8% budget cut this next year. And it's not because Trump isn't committed to the military, but like I think there's a lot of people who are starting to realize, like even just some very basic financial accountability. I mean, like there's just so much fat that could be cut off these things.
When I was overseas, we lost, not like our brigade lost $63 million. Like they couldn't account for where the $63 million went.
63 mil. I mean, like, did they have?
I mean, and that's just one brigade. And I mean, like you have multiple brigades in the infantry division, but that's just one brigade loses $63 million worth of equipment, worth of Connex boxes. So, I mean, that's all taxpayer money right there. I mean, that would be like a county school budget right there, just disappearing. So, I mean, to me, that's just absolutely absurd. And then there's just a lot of the Pentagon, and I think they create this culture of lying. So, for instance, we had 13 Bradley fighting vehicles assigned to us. And what they would do is they were the company for a company. So you have, multiple companies in a battalion. You have multiple battalions in a brigade. So the companies would report up to the battalion, basically a number of how many vehicles were serviceable. So we would, like your crews would get out there, and I was on a Bradley crew, and we would PMCS our vehicle, which is like doing a maintenance check. Make sure the turret works, the fire systems work, track tension's right, everything like that, and it's like operational. So if you have any problems, you would have to annotate that and then turn that into your like motor pool sergeant. And then that motor pool sergeant would give that number to your company commander. But what ends up happening is like we only had like 3 vehicles that work. And then it got reported up that we had like 5 vehicles that worked to the battalion. And then the battalion reported up the number to the brigade that's like, oh, this company has, 10 vehicles that work. And then the brigade reports up to U.S. Army Central Command for the Middle East, and they say this company here has, 12 operational vehicles out of 13 for their Bradley fighting vehicles. But then, like every company does that, so you have like multiple companies that are all reporting their like readiness status as it goes from four operational to like all of a sudden 90% of the battalions apparently ready to go to war. So that exists from all the way from the bottom up to the top. And it's like a very bad system. And they actually got in trouble for that because when General Soleimani, I was over there in 2019 to 2020, when they killed General Soleimani in that strike, when he was like stirring up Shiite militias in Iraq, they were like, oh, we need to have, Iran was like threatening to go to war and all that kind of good stuff. So they were like, we need 100% readiness. We need all the tracks and the vehicles staged at Camp Buring, ready to go, munitions loaded. And then it started to come out that it was like, oh, we only have 4 vehicles that are good to go. The rest of them, like, we can't even like get them out of the motor pool there. So they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, and it was like across that for the entire like armored brigade combat team. And so like Big Army basically got caught in a lie, but crap rolls downhill. So they started just like doing a inspector general investigation, and they found out like, oh yeah, only like 15 to 20% of the force here, which is supposed to act as a QRF force for the region, was like operational. And like this has been going on, like lying about numbers, probably as long as militaries have existed, but especially since Vietnam, it was really big where they would like report up you have 2 or 3 U.S. soldiers that died, and then they would say something like, yeah, but we killed 30 VC, when they might have just killed like 3 or something like that. So it was like a 3 for 3 like casualty swap. But like that doesn't sound good, if you say like we only killed 3 dudes. So like, and then that number just keeps getting like exaggerated and more exaggerated as things like go up the chain of command, and then finally makes its way to the American public or the Pentagon. So I mean, like just knowing the culture of the military, I think that that's what they're really scared of, is that, you know, things are going to look way worse if there's an audit than if they just keep like shuffling their feet and keeping their head down, because like this is people's like livelihood, and this is how they get promoted, this is how they get the retirement checks, this is like the career for like being a soldier to them isn't like a noble thing. It's just like a thing where it's like, oh, I can get 20 years and I get a pension.
Well, yeah, it's a government
So
job.
yeah, it's like welfare for conservatives a lot of times, and I hate to say it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I never had military experience, but I think the more and more you interact with a lot of military guys, the more it becomes clear that, I mean, not for everyone, especially after things like 9/11, you see like real volunteerism, but yeah, so much of what you see is a bunch of people who clearly, this is just their career path, and if this hadn't worked out, they would have become an accountant or something.
Yeah, they're not true. They're not true leaders. There's a book by Chris Whitlock, and it's called The Afghanistan Papers, and he details. I mean, he's your typical. I think he's a Washington Post journalist, so he's pretty left leaning, but he did a pretty objective job at writing this book, and he basically was covering like the war in Afghanistan, and there were entire bases on paper that the Pentagon had, that they were like, oh yeah, we're pouring in like, I don't know, $1.5 billion into this base over here in this valley, and there's the ANA, the Afghan National Army, has something like 15,000 troops stationed at this base, and they started doing investigations, and they would send like these IG teams out there along with congressional leaders from the defense budget, and there would be just be like an empty valley, nothing there, but on paper it was there. So like you have a lot of that stuff going on there. So like I actually read this book before Afghanistan fell in, was it 2021? Um, and there was like a lot of talk like, like, oh, we think the ANA can actually do a good job, and we've been training them for 20 years. Well, the thing is like on paper they could have an army that's like 100,000 or 500,000 or whatever, but in reality it was like probably somewhere around like maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 or something like that, and the rest were just like paper soldiers that were, that money that they were apparently getting was actually just going to like the officers and the ANA battalion commanders and brigade commanders, like they were just like pocketing all that stuff. So like there's not like big accountability in the military, and there was less accountability for our, I guess you could call them, third world partner nations that we work with. So I mean, it's just a big boondoggle of just money just being blown out of the printer, and there's like zero accountability for anything.
Well, I
think that's what you're going to see is like if they do an audit, Doge does, you're just going to see like people are going to get really, really upset at the military.
Well, and like how much of this is applicable to the rest of life too? So like you're describing a military issue, and I'm willing to bet it's a little bit more acute in the military just due to the nature of federal bureaucracy. But man, I mean, like the exact same thing is happening, though it's kind of reversed when it comes to like illegal immigration reporting. So like you have these numbers like, oh, like, maybe if we had like maybe 8,000 people, like this is more during the Biden years, but it was like 8,000 people crossed the border this month. That's up from the month before where we had 7,500. But like, we all know those numbers are probably significantly higher than what they were reporting.
Yeah, they also leave out like the gotaways or the unknowns as well. Like there has to be a statistical average of what the unknowns are as well. Like, oh well, if this is how many people we're catching, how many people are we seeing, on our drone footage or ISR kind of stuff? Like they have better numbers, but those numbers aren't getting reported or getting rolled up into the actual report. And it's like, yeah, I think that exists kind of. It exists especially in America in the 20th century, and I still kind of think we're like, I go with J.J. Reno's kind of perspective from Return of the Strong Gods, that it's like we're just in a really long 20th century, and you're in like a time where I think lying has just become, people don't look at lying as like some kind of like sin. It's just, I have to lie because I need to get myself an out or something.
Yeah.
And it's like you have that all the way down from the lowest level all the way up to the top. And that just, I mean, that it like bleeds into everything. And like I have friends that they'll just lie about the simplest or like little thing, like things that don't even matter. It's like, well, why would you even lie about that? They're like, just tell the truth. I mean, like no one's gonna be upset if you screwed up or you did something wrong, and it's especially if it's not affecting them or just But you see that kind of stuff that just bleeds through from the lowest to the highest.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see some improvement there. I sort of like the theory, and maybe this is just cope a little bit, but I kind of like the theory that maybe Trump's re-election was actually the true beginning of the 21st century, or at least a transitional pivot to the next century. Hopefully, the reforms we're seeing will help usher in something like that. Hard to know, but yeah. Trying to think. Did we see any updated immigration numbers the last month or so? I've noticed they've started slowing down. You don't see those daily updates like you used to.
The last I saw was, I don't remember what the number was, but it was like something yesterday, like that the numbers were slowing down like quite a bit. So I'm not sure, but I'm not sure like what those numbers were, and I don't know if that is, are some of these groups like being somewhat effective, because I've been seeing them like pop up left and right, the activist groups. I'm not sure if it's because some of these people are in hiding, like personal anecdote. There's this trailer park that I drive by frequently on the way to drop the kids off to school. And before Trump was in office, it was just a line of kids, clearly from, probably Mexico. And when I drive by that bus stop now, there might be 2 or 3 families versus like 20 or 30 kids. So I don't know if who knows, they could have been all deported. But there's a bit of me that thinks like they've started going into hiding. And I would expect those numbers to fluctuate, here and there. But yeah, I don't know what those numbers are. I just know that I saw something like those numbers are on a downward trend right now.
Well, it makes me wonder if what was being done at first was, these agencies had probably collected like outstanding like deportation warrants, and Biden just hadn't been using them. So what you saw at the beginning was, basically clearinghouse of outstanding warrants, because like a lot of the people you saw getting deported at first, and this is one thing that I think is worth pointing out, is pretty much all of the deportations so far have been of illegal immigrants that were committed of additional crimes. Like, in my opinion at least, you're not really seeing the big change in deportation will be when they start deporting people who haven't been committed or who haven't committed additional crimes at all. Like, when you start seeing a lot of people getting deported just for being illegal, which is a good enough reason. I mean, that's a felony too. But yeah, I do think a lot of it was like them just clearing out a bunch of people they had on the docket that Biden was just kind of slowballing. And now they're having to learn how to get their machine going for people who haven't committed additional crimes.
I think you might also see a lot of self-deportation, or at least people gearing up to self-deport, especially if you know that it's not going to be a hospital place for you to kind of like live anymore. If you're not going to be able to take advantage of an emergency room, the public school, if Social Security is going to start getting audited and you're not going to be able to get Medicaid and Medicare and all these kind of benefits that come along with the kind of administrative total state, then there's not going to be an incentive for you to stay here anymore.
Well, also simply,
if employers start getting like audited as well, like in Florida.
yeah. Well, the other thing too is like if you can't get construction jobs anymore, like if people start auditing construction, like those are big employment sectors. Not to mention too, like I kind of learned this from experience from kind of one of my earlier jobs. Some of these immigrants, like they don't even pretend to immigrate full time. Like I used to have this one Mexican coworker whose dad would come up like every summer and work for us, and then he'd just go back to Mexico, and it was all illegal from what I understand. So like there's going to be people like
it's
that
like
who are like seasonal migrants, and they just
the
decide
fruit
not to
pickers.
bother.
Yeah, like you have you kind of have like a theme of this in John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, where you have like these like Okies and seasonal, people that come into town and basically muck up everything and make a mess. And they end up basically, moving from town to town, and then they'll go back to their, like village or whatever where they came from, but they'll come back up for like grape season or peach season or whatever season. And it's kind of that way with, I think you see with that with construction. You'll have an area that's really booming, and you'll have an influx of migrant workers, and they will just stay for, your busy construction time is really from late spring, summer, and then the fall, and then things kind of slow back down again in the winter and the early spring when you have a lot of rain coming in. But they'll come up, they'll hang out here for 6 to 9 months, and then they'll go back to wherever they came from. And that's problematic too, because like, these homes aren't getting any cheaper. In fact, they're getting more expensive, even though the labor is extremely cheap as well. And the quality is not getting better of our homes that we're building right now in the United States. It's actually getting worse. You can also see this with like commercial job sites. I mean, you got the Obama library, and there's like tons of problems right now with it. But my father's a home inspector, and he, my brother is as well, and he'll say things like, the houses that they're inspecting, I mean, they might have been built 6 months ago, and they're already having structural or foundation issues. And this is something that's just really, really common with the housing market right now, is that the quality of workers that they're importing and using, although cheap, are not actually up to snuff, which is like the laughable argument where people, especially like your glib people, and they'll say like, well, who's going to build our homes? Well, like the people that built them in the past will have to build them. Like Americans will have to build them. And it kind of filters in that conversation that was going on around Christmas time, where people were talking about like, oh, young guys they want to build something. It's like, yeah, they can start with building a house for somebody. Like there's going to be a lot of manual labor jobs in the market opening up if you get rid of immigration, which I'm fine with. But like there's going to have to be a lot of people coming to terms with, you're not going to work a cubicle government style office job where you're making $75,000 to $110,000 a year, and you're working a 36-hour work week with 5 weeks paid time off. Like that's just not going to, like those jobs are not going to be, I think AI is also going to make a lot of that stuff go away. But I think that a lot of people are going to start, it's going to be like ripping a Band-Aid off for a lot of people's reality that went to school for, 4 to 6 years or whatever they did. And it's like the jobs that the teachers told them to get don't exist. You don't need this many people with business degrees. You don't need this many people with accounting degrees. Like there are some certain fields like the tech sector where you could probably get rid of like 90% of the Indians that are in it. But for a vast majority of jobs, it's going to be a lot of manual labor jobs that are going to open up. And someone's going to have to fill that. So, I mean, it's going to have to be Americans. And I know that kind of sounds like harsh to say that, it's like, yep, you got lied to. Sorry about that. But like, there are going to be a plethora of, manual labor jobs that'll open up.
Yeah, I think if there's economic downturn, which there's a lot of companies starting to prepare for that. Like originally, it was thought that 26, maybe 27 would see some economic boom. But more and more companies are starting to bring that in a little bit. And there's a lot of companies kind of starting to prepare for maybe the end of this year to 26, where they start seeing that downturn. because if you like the idea of cycles or not, there are certain economic cycles that tend to happen. And, just about anywhere between about 18 to 20 years, you start having real estate market cycles. They start to boom, and then all of a sudden they just start to collapse. And you see other things that have that issue too. And it usually starts with unemployment is kind of volatile. It's up, it's down, it's down, it's up. And, if you have people that are not able to get jobs or maintain the same type of salary, then you usually start seeing those affect the real estate market quite a bit. And originally, a lot of companies kind of thought that this year would be pretty good. Heading into 26 will probably be the blow off top. And then in 27, you would start seeing a lot of those issues happen. And a lot of the guys in the market that I see have started to bring that in quite a bit. And I know that, like Stormy Waters talks about it quite a bit. He's mentioned that, 25, we might start seeing some of it. And, usually it's about on an average. And so when he started talking about that, I was quite familiar with what he was talking about with some economic downturn. So I think with that, if you kind of look at that, if people are having a hard time finding a job, they're more prone to start working in those type of manual labor positions, either by choice or by force. And so I think that will kind of somewhat, quote unquote, correct the market. Yeah,
and you have a lot of CEOs also, and I'm not trying to sound like you're like how do I put it, where you're like some kind of like Occupy Wall Street person. But for the example, like the company that I work at, the CEO makes like 490 something times more money than your average employee at the company. So there comes a point where I think like the top of a company and the CEOs and CFOs and the board and everyone else and your higher level managers and regional districts, where they're making like a filthy lucrative amount of money, and your regular employees, your Americans, are just kind of making like average wages. And I think that it's not gonna, I don't think we've had this debate yet in the country, because it's been very left coded, but I think the right is going to actually pick up this argument here soon, where they're going to start noticing that there's just this like massive, like just deficit between like a company's running poorly, the managers of the company are making like something ridiculous, like I don't know, it's like say like $70 million a year with $20 million bonuses. And I think people are going to start asking questions like, okay, then why are we getting laid off, but like the CEO is like getting another big bonus? Or like these CEOs will like float from one company to another company to another company, and then they'll like crash the company. So that's probably going to be something that people start talking about over the next I think people start talking about that over the next 4 years, where they're just going to start noticing this kind of patterns of like very bad fake elites that aren't very good at governing. And there's like a spiritual aspect to this too, where you like, you have like the charge of a home where it's like children obey your parents, and you have like wives, submit yourself to your husbands, and husbands love your wives like Christ loved the church. But it goes all the way down to like masters and servants as well, where you have like bad stewards of companies, and they're not actually giving their employees or the people that work for them a fair shake, because they're just like a global homo kind of corporation. I always think of like the movie Dodgeball, like we're Globo Jim, but it's like that way with corporations. And I think people are going to start coming to this conclusion that it's like, oh, the people that are like leading every single institution, just not the government, but like companies, like big Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, they're going to look at that and be like, wow, like everyone's an idiot, from the government to corporate America. Like and we see this also within like like your evangelical style churches, where your biggest like thought leaders are just kind of retarded. and it's just that way, just across the board. So it's like I don't know what the solution to that is, besides like these kind of, or I guess late boomers now, are just like driving the car and they've cut the brake lines and they're hoping that they can like bail at the last minute and like walk away and like go to the Bahamas and live a nice life. But I don't know what the ultimate end of that is. That's all like I had on that like topic right there, was just kind of just wrapping that kind of thing up there. So it'll be interesting to see which way the job market goes, and like if the right reacts the same way that they react if it's just like go get a job at Panda Express, but being told, hey, like, oh, go do this here, but we want to pay you like slave labor wages.
I think
And people, I mean, I could see that happening where it's like, oh no, we want to pay you the same that we paid these illegal Mexicans that were here, and people are going to look at that and be like, no, like you're making $100 million a year. Like, why can't you pay me a normal American wage to live in
and
this
I
country?
think that's the I think the reason that sort of leftists or at least previously leftist kind of coded economic populism hasn't taken off is because I think most people, I actually tend to kind of lean this way too, but I mean, we'll have to see what happens. But I think there's a lot of people who are sort of assuming, like, hey, like, we shouldn't try to get the government involved in our employer-employee negotiations yet, because right now the government is propping up the bad job market with illegal immigration. So I think, like, if you successfully, deported everyone who needed to go, and then there was still this issue persisting, then maybe you would see that. But I think until the immigration question is answered, I think the answer is always going to be like, well, I think the government is currently involved in our negotiations, but against us, and it's through immigration. Now, personally, will that actually result in more jobs, or will that just result in increased automation? I kind of lean towards automation, because I think a lot of these companies will say, like, well, we can't afford to pay everyone like a normal wage, so we'll just take that extra money and dump it into, financing for more complex machinery, and that'll.
I mean, and that might be the case for manufacturing, but I mean, what, like if you're just looking at the home market, like you can't have automation putting up drywall and painting walls and framing and roofing and laying brick. Those are like jobs, and even like we're like in the trucking industry, like people keep talking about like, oh, we can have automatic trucks and stuff like that. Um, I don't think the technology is quite there yet to just have these, you know, multi-ton vehicles flying down the road at 80 miles an hour. Because as soon as you start having casualties and massive accidents, and even though there are accidents that happen, people want to be able to blame a human, but it's like no one wants to blame. Like if there's no one to blame, that's problematic, and I think that'll like start rubbing people the wrong way. Um, and it's from trucking to um, like the construction, housing market, even landscaping, uh, some warehouse positions. You just won't be able to automate that out. I think you'll still have people that'll have to fill those positions, but like every mom and pop company, like they're hiring. They just can't find like anybody willing
Yeah.
to do the job.
The other thing that I wonder too about economic populism is, there's all these areas where, like, they're more affordable, which is kind of a euphemism for, like, they're in a bad part of town. But a lot of those houses are just genuinely worth less because they're not in desirable metros. But a lot of people don't want to move there because, like, the crime is so high. And part of the reason the crime is so high is you have, like, very large foreign-born populations. Now, it's not always that reason, but a lot of times it's that reason. I wonder if, even if wages don't go up much, if the housing market really dives and you can all of a sudden buy a decent house for like maybe less than 100K again. I don't know. Maybe people won't even complain anymore, because like
Perhaps.
all of a sudden, if you're getting like, I mean, especially if interest rates go down too, Like, let's say the housing market dips and you've got guys getting like $400, $500 mortgages again. Well, then it doesn't matter if you're making $40,000 a year, because
Yeah, I just don't see. I don't see that even being like a viable solution. I mean, it would be nice,
Well,
but it's like everyone that's already bought into the market is going to be super, super pissed because like, oh, if I paid, $400,000 for my home, and now all of a sudden all the homes around me are like 190. I mean, that would be a really like you have people paying like, a mortgage of like, 2,500, and then the guy next door is paying like a mortgage of like 800.
well, it happened around the 2008 to maybe around to about 2011 to 12. And so this is what was mentioning before, like, so, like real estate markets usually work on an 18 to 19 year cycle. And the prediction was originally, because it happened in 2008, most people thought that it was going to start happening around the end of 26 to early 27. And 27 was predicted to be a really rough financial time for most. And when you just kind of like talk about all of the money printing, spending, these fake prop ups by the government, propping up our economy for the longest time, you pop in just tons of people into the population, and then all of a sudden you withdraw them. You're talking about also supply and demand. So what ends up happening is there will be a major drastic decrease in house prices eventually. I don't know what those prices will be. The problem is, I've talked about this like with a few people before. So let's just say Trump is successful in cutting government spending and deporting people, and some of these other campaign promises. And if he's successful, we are going to see some hard economic times. We're going to see certain things collapse. And for me, I'm willing to go through that if I can have my country and my nation back. I don't know how many other people are. And when you really think, excuse me, like when you really think about it, there were a lot of illegals that had jobs, or even if we cut back on certain visas and stuff like that, some of that was propping up our employment market. And so if we're not able to fill that vacuum, like, it is going to cause some issues. We're probably going to start seeing some houses that are being built currently, because like if you come around here, I mean, dude, there's just like acres of woods that are just torn down, and there's new houses being built up because all of these real estate places and these banks are seeing a golden opportunity, because the real estate market is just hot right now. And I know in my neighborhood, there's been a couple of people that have sold their houses for double of what they were just even 5 years ago.
There's people making lucrative money right now, and it's like eventually that has to come to an end.
It will
at least level out at some point.
It will. The housing bubbles are real. They do happen. It's hard to predict like what that price will be. It's hard to say as well. Like, will our wages eventually come down if inflation comes down? It's really hard to say. I think eventually housing will become a lot more affordable.
Well, it's completely unaffordable right now. The only thing I could think that would also happen is like your older parts of town, like more I don't know, North Carolina has a lot of mill home neighborhoods, especially in like where I live. You have like the old Cannon Mill and Pilatex and Philip Morris and everything that used to exist, and you have these entire sections of town, like thousands and thousands of mill homes, you can right now like pick them up for somewhere around, I don't know, like $75,000, and they're absolute crap. They have like what is it, like tube and wire, like electrical work. They have probably lead pipes. There's foundational issues because back during World War II, people dug cellars underneath in their crawl space, which is like not like completely against what you would do with any kind of building code today. So like there's serious structural or foundational issues. There are just, asbestos paint, or just the house is just completely crap. And you're gonna have to sink like $100,000 into actually like beefing this thing up to actually like live in properly. Um, but I mean, I could see like maybe those homes basically crashing to nothing because like why would you buy that if the the track home cookie cutter style neighborhoods start leveling out to somewhere around like an affordable price? Because I mean, I don't live in a track home neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood that was built in the 90s. So like it's all a lot of like custom builders would come in and build homes, or they buy up 10 lots and then do like 5 different designs and change each one of them a little bit separately and different. But I would wonder if you could see like if those track home neighborhoods come down to like somewhere around 250 or maybe low threes, and then like who would be wanting to even buy a a home that, or like an old mill home for $100,000. Like I could see those, like you'd be able to pick those up for like $25,000 at a minimum, and then sink $100,000 into them, taking out like a small loan or something like that. That might be the first step of like where you see a real estate kind of shift.
Yeah, honestly, housing is going to be such a huge story. Not yet, maybe, but in a few years. Yeah, because even without deportations, with the shrinking population, especially with an older population, where you could have a more significant number go away a little bit sooner rather than later, probably just due to age. Yeah, I mean, we're going to see some sort of fluctuation in housing. I don't know what that'll look like. Hopefully, that problem doesn't get quote unquote solved by bringing in a lot more immigrants later. But
Well, here's actually something I noticed is there's some really nice neighborhoods in my area, and it's like mainly boomers in their late 70s, early 80s that are living in them. And these homes are like 3,000, 3,200 square garage. And it's like two old boomers living there on 2 acres of land in a neighborhood, or an acre and a half. And it's like these homes, when you look at like the Zillow estimate, or like the Zestimate, or whatever you want to call it, it'll be like 900 or like almost shy of $1 million. But it's like, if who's buying that? The people that are who actually can afford that right now? Because I'll see these homes go up on the market, and they'll now sit on the market for like months and months and months. Um, Especially if millennials aren't having children at the same rate that boomers had children or Gen Xers had children. They're like not having kids at all. Like why would a millennial, especially if people are getting married later or just like only having one kid, you wouldn't need a home that's almost 4,000 square feet with with like a 3-car garage. Like that just doesn't make any sense for you to purchase something like that. So like I think you'll see like two spectrums here, where you'll see the homes that are in that like 900,000 ballpark just crazy drop, and then you'll see the bottom homes at the market, like your mill homes, and you're really kind of like, I think what you said earlier was like junker homes, or like just like total trash homes, like also just completely bottom out, because like the most desirable stuff will be like homes built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, before you had like Niblock homes come into North Carolina and just start throwing up cookie cutter neighborhoods left and right. People are going to want to live it where at least like building code was starting to be established. But they're also not willing to, pay $900,000 for, if it's just them and their girlfriend, that they're cohabiting with to move into a 4,000 square foot home with a 3-car garage and almost 2 acres of land. It just wouldn't make any sense. I think that those are going to be the hardest hit markets. It's like the bottom side of the market and the top side of the market.
Well, we have a lot more topics we could have covered, but we were really in depth on a few. We're getting close to 9:30. Is there any other topic we're wanting to address or anything we want to mention before we kind of start heading out?
No, I think that was. I think we might have been a little topic heavy actually. For this week, we might have to scale down the amount of topics that we have.
It's not bad. It gives us a lot to choose from.
Yeah, but I think the home market and just immigration was a really big thing.
Well, of course, we are here at the Nathanael Green Society. We're the North Carolina chapter of the Old Glory Club. So if you are in North Carolina, please consider sending us an application. We'd be happy to have you. Also, if you are not in North Carolina, the Old Glory Club has chapters all throughout the country. And if there's not one in your state, then we here at this chapter and also Central Committee and other chapters, we're all very happy to pitch in and help you get something started in your state or in your city, anything along those lines. It's not limited just to one per state. So lots of options. We do thank you for joining us. Any last words from leadership before we head out? All right. Well, I think that's it. Thank you for joining us. And same time next week, we'll be back and we'll have plenty of more topics to discuss. So anyway, though, have a good evening.
Thanks.